Hi, everyone. Brad Free with David Aragona. This is Daily Racing Forum's Derby Watch Top 20. David, let's start with the biggest development last week. It happened at Santa Anita and produced a new favorite on Derby Watch.
Yeah, I think I said when we spoke on the phone this week, it kind of feels like we're starting over again with the results from this past week because we were kind of waiting for a definitive result to reveal itself on the Derby Trail. And that definitely happened last Saturday with the journalism's very fast victory in the San Felipe. And as you can see with our revised top 20 list, I dropped him all the way down from 20-1 last week to be the clear 9-2 favorite this week.
Well, deservedly so, with a 108 Beyer speed figure in the San Felipe. That's a race that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But he was not the only three-year-old comebacker who emerged last weekend. Sovereignty down in Gulfstream Park, at Gulfstream Park, scored a come from behind win in the Fountain of Youth, and his odds took a similar drop as well.
Yeah, I think, was the same price as journalism last week with his victory off the layoff. I think surpassing some people's expectations of how well he'd run in his first start off the bench. He also dropped to 8-1. One of the co-second choices, I've got those three horses clumped together, all at 8-1. Barnes and Citizen Bull, the two Baffert runners. Citizen Bull, obviously not in action this past week. And Barnes, I personally lowered his price slightly with his second place finish in the San Felipe, though looking at some of the chatter out there, it seems like his stock went down in some people's eyes with that runner-up performance.
I honestly don't understand that at all, David. I think when we spoke earlier this week, I said if you would have guaranteed to me that Barnes was going to earn a 105 Beyer speed figure in the San Felipe, I might have taken him at odds of 2-5. He ran well. Barnes ran very well. I know it's disappointing if you did bet him at 2-5 because he got beat. But he got beat not because he ran poorly. He got beat by a very good horse named Journalism. So I don't think there's anything for the Barnes camp to be ashamed of other than the fact that he fell short, but he ran well. And we'll talk more about the San Felipe in a couple of minutes. The only horse that was added to Derby Watch this week was the Gotham winner Flood Zone. And while there are questions regarding how far he wants to run, there's no doubt about the Gotham Stakes. It was a fast, decisive victory.
It was. He got a 98 Beyer for the performance, the second fastest prep of this past weekend. It was just the one-turn mile, and he still has to prove that he can go two turns and beat better competition, because I don't think anybody's viewing the Gotham as the strongest prep for this year's Kentucky Derby, but he's certainly in the right kind of barn with Brad Cox to make those strides forward.
For sure. I was speaking with Brad Cox early this week on a different matter and asked him what, Flood Zone's agenda looks like. As of right now, there is none. He's not sure, what they're going to do. He wanted to see the speed figures, monitor how the horse came back. He was headed back down to Florida, Flood Zone was, and a decision will be made on whether he stretches out to two turns for his next start, or who knows, maybe he'll stay at a one turn. That's to be determined. Anyway, Flood Zone is the new addition to the list, and the only horse we dropped, and David, you and I went back and forth on this. Getaway Car has 36 points, and Baeza has 0 points. We ultimately decided to drop Getaway Car off the top 20, put him on the bubble, and keep Baeza. I feel kind of bad. 36 points for Getaway Car just about gets him into the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, I deferred to you on that one, Brad. I know you're a fan of Baeza, so we'll keep him on the list for now. But I think we were just looking at the number of Bob Baffert horses that we had on this list, with Getaway Car included. It would have been 5 out of the 20 in the Bob Baffert stable. And I think you know this better than I do, Brad. Bob is probably not going to run 5 horses in the Kentucky Derby, and especially not 5 horses all with the same running style. So you got to imagine at some point down the line, if Barnes and Citizen Bull continue to be his top 2, maybe some of these other horses will get rerouted in different directions.
Yeah, so Getaway Car moves to on the bubble. Flood Zone opens up at 30-1 on David's line. The only other significant change in price, David, was Burnham Square, who you had listed 15-1 last week. He did not run very well, in my opinion, in the Fountain of Youth, and you raised him to 30-1.
Yeah, I don't think he's completely out of the picture yet, because he still did run a career best Beyer despite disappointing in that race, but he's going to have to rebound against some better competition in his final round prep. And the good news for this Ian Wilkes trainee is he will get another chance.
He's headed, I believe, to the Bluegrass Stakes. That was reported by one of the Daily Racing Forum correspondents early this week. So Burnham Square will get another chance. He did move forward on Beyer speed figures, and ultimately disappointing performance that we'll talk about when we address the Fountain of Youth. Let's start off talking about the San Felipe Stakes that was run last Saturday at Santa Anita. 3 Derby watchers in the field: Barnes, Rodriguez, and Journalism. a lot of people expected Barnes to take the lead and roll gate to wire. And a lot of folks, myself included, thought that journalism might need a comeback race. It was his first start in 2.5 months. What happened, David?
Well, we'll take a look at the stretch run of that San Felipe. And right here, I think for Frank Miramati called Barnes opening up a 3-length lead like he was going to put the race away. And you could tell even he was caught off guard by the acceleration that journalism is able to show in the final 3/16 of a mile, as he just really, you can see, visually lengthening that stride to not only reel in Barnes, but pull away from him fairly comfortably in the final 16th of a mile of this race, just gallop out with real power through the finish line. And everything about this performance, Brad, just screams that this horse is going to love added ground. He's only run up to 1.16 miles so far, but he certainly gives the impression that 1.25 miles is going to be right up his alley. And still at that shorter distance, he earned a 1:08 buyer, which is just historically fast in the past decade. We haven't seen horses post these kinds of numbers in the prep races. Obviously, we saw one a little bit earlier on this Derby trail, but Magnitude is now since on the sidelines, so he's not a factor. But I mean, journalism, I think, even more trustworthy than that horse would have been, because while it was a surprise maybe to some that he beat Barnes, this is a horse that had shown real quality and potential as a 2-year-old. So you kind of had the inkling that the improvement would be there once he finally got to that point.
Well, he's the son of Curlin. He's out of a graded stakes winning dam who ran long her entire career. Everything about journalism is positive. I'd love to try to find a hole in, handicapping hole in journalism, but I can't. He's fast with a 108 buyer speed figure. By the way, that's the highest speed figure for the San Felipe since California Chrome in 2014. California Chrome had a pretty good season. He won the Santa Anita Derby, Kentucky Derby, and Preakness Stakes in his next 3 starts. So journalism has some big shoes to follow, so to speak. As far as journalism goes, he's fast. He's sufficiently seasoned with 3 route races under his belt. He was a graded stakes winner as a 2-year-old, now a graded stakes winner as a 3-year-old. If I had to find one silly flaw in it, I just wonder if maybe he ran too fast off a 2.5-month break, but that's a kind of a silly thing to be picky about. He's good. He's solid. I don't think he has an apparent hole as far as the early favorite for the Kentucky Derby goes, David.
Yeah, and some people might be a little bit concerned about the fact that he improved by 21 buyer points and maybe question where that number came from. I'll say one thing about that. When you look back at the Los Alamitos Futurity in retrospect, I don't think the buyer team's going to go back and revise the number, but it's very easy to make the case that that was a difficult day to make figures at Los Al, and that's a fig that could easily be in the 90s when you look at the runbacks from that race, because he's not the only horse to improve by a significant margin on the buyer scale coming out of that Los Al Futurity. Really, the only horse that didn't improve by between 10 and 25 points was Gaming, who I think we might talk about later, but he's a horse who had a trip in his next start, and maybe we'll see him make a further stride forward in his subsequent races.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big number. It was a little bit higher than I expected, but regardless of whether you think it should have been a 108 or a 104, I think the one thing everybody will agree on, it was a fast race. 142-1 at Santa Anita is a fast final time. Journalism, he's the right favorite, and as of right now, everything looks good. Where does he start next? Most likely the Santa Anita Derby on April 5th. Trainer Michael McCarthy needs to consult with the ownership group before that decision is solidified. But journalism is based at Santa Anita. It's where he ran. It's where he'll be training. And we expect to see him in the Santa Anita Derby on April 5th. Let's talk about Barnes's runner-up finish, David. He was 2-5. He was the controlling speed. I think he ran his race. I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of with regards to that runner-up finish. What about you?
Yeah, I had some questions about how far he wanted to go, how fast he was going to be able to run, since he really had not gotten a particularly noteworthy speed figure yet in his first couple of starts. And to me, he exceeded expectations once you saw the speed figures come out. I mean, a 105 buyer, if you take journalism out of the race, suddenly we'll be talking about Barnes as a potential triple crown threat for Bob Baffert. And maybe some people will question me making journalism as low as a 9-2 in March on Derby Watch right now. But if you took him out of the race and Barnes was the winner by some 9 lengths, I think people would expecting him to be around 3-1 or 7-2 based on the hype that he had accrued coming into the race. So I'm not down on Barnes at all, but I do think one of the key points that handicappers are making coming out of the San Felipe is that, and you were getting at it, Brad, between these two horses, it does feel like there's more confidence that journalism will continue his improvement as the distances get longer. And I think that there are rightly still some question marks about Barnes' stamina down the line.
Well, there's no question about that. I mean, there should be. I mean, he's only routed once. He had a clear lead into the lane and got run down by a very good horse. So Barnes remains one of the elite 3-year-olds in the country, even though he got beat at 2-5. It was his first start around 2 turns. Trainer Bob Baffert said this week that he thought that Barnes got a little bit tired. I'm not sure about that. Baffert doesn't normally send out short horses. I think he got beat by an outstanding 3-year-old. To me, the biggest surprise, and it was a disappointment, was the distant third place finish of Rodriguez. I actually thought he might have a chance to spring an upset in the San Felipe. His runner-up finish in the Bob Lewis last time out was a lot better than it looks on paper. He kind of lost position into the far turn and re-rallied. He was up pressing the pace just outside Barnes, and Rodriguez gave nothing in the stretch. He finished more than 9 lengths behind Barnes. I was disappointed in Rodriguez. David, what about you? Were your expectations as high as mine?
My expectations were lower. I did like journalism in that race. I was so impressed by his workouts coming in. I wasn't expecting the 108 buyer, but he did look ready. Rodriguez, on the other hand, he impressed me in the maiden win where he got the 100 buyer, but that was the day they sent him to the front end. And since then, he's been in races with other Baffert stablemates that maybe are a little more highly regarded than he is. And we know the choreography that goes on when there are multiple Baffert runners in these races early, and they've just decided that he's going to be the one that's in the pressing role, or maybe just stalking, I should say. He's not really applying much pressure with his stablemates in these past couple of races, and maybe he's just not at his best with that running style. I'd love to see him go to a different prep race, get away from all these Baffert horses, maybe run in a race like the Wood and just go to the front, air it out, and see what he can do. But I don't know if Bob's going to give him that chance.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he's going to do yet with Rodriguez either, but he did hint early this week that he's considering removing blinkers for Rodriguez. He doesn't think that Rodriguez needs blinkers anymore. He's worn them in all 4 of his starts, and he's shown speed in every one of those starts. I think that Baffert would like to see him settle off the pace a little bit. At least that's the impression I got in conversation with Baffert this week, but it remains to be seen. So there's a potential equipment change for Rodriguez that is hardly official. It's something that Baffert is considering. I think he wants Rodriguez to come from a little bit farther off the pace than he has been lately, but we'll find out down the road. So Rodriguez is still a work in progress. Unfortunately, he'll only have one more start if he's going to make the Kentucky Derby, one final prep race going into the Kentucky Derby for Rodriguez. Okay, we already looked at the past performances. Let's talk a little bit, since the San Felipe leads into the Santa Anita Derby. The San Felipe was run with only 5 starters, which means the winner earned 37.5 Derby qualifying points, and runner-up Barnes only 18.75. The Santa Anita Derby, as of this morning, I have 3 confirmed starters, those being Journalism, Baeza, and Citizen Bull. If the Santa Anita Derby has 5 runners or only 5 runners, it's going to be a similar points reduction, and that puts a horse like Baeza in a real bad situation because Baeza has 0 points for the Kentucky Derby. If only 5 runners go in the Santa Anita Derby, and let's say Baeza runs well but finishes second, he'll have 37.5 points in a 5-horse field. If it's only 4 runners in the Derby, he would have even less than that, only 25. 37.5 points is just about the cutoff for making the Kentucky Derby field. David, you argued early this week when we spoke that Baeza is in a difficult predicament with regards to making the Kentucky Derby field. What's your take on it this morning?
Yeah, I mean, as long as Journalism ends up in the Santa Anita Derby along with Citizen Bull, they're just going to be the 2 heavy favorites in the race. And we'll see how many others decide to participate if Baffert even feels like he needs to run anybody else, because let's be honest, Citizen Bull doesn't need any points. He's in the race. So Baffert really has no incentive to run anybody else in the race if they're going to get in Citizen Bull's way. So I wonder if Baffert's going to not be the one to make it a bigger field and it's going to be incumbent on other trainers. We'll see how that all plays out, but it definitely does feel like a race that is under threat to have the points reduced once again.
It's unfortunate too. And just looking back on Santa Anita Derby history, the last 45 years, only one time has the Santa Anita Derby been run with 5 starters or fewer. That was back in 2006. There are fewer horses in California than there were back then, 20 years ago, 19 years ago. And we've seen field size consistently shrink. So the Sanity to Derby point situation is something that's we're going to have to be aware of as we get a little bit closer to that race on April 5th. Okay, Baez is up against it. He's still on the Derby top 20. Getaway car drops down to on the bubble, and Journalism emerges as the new Kentucky Derby favorite. But David, there was a big race by a comebacker in Florida last Saturday. Another horse that I think many of us expected, well, he probably needs a start. Sovereignty did not need a start, did he?
Yeah, this race happened chronologically just before the San Felipe, and I think people were proclaiming Sovereignty the new Kentucky Derby favorite for about 45 minutes before that race was run. And as you said, I don't think everyone was expecting for him to put in the kind of run that he did based on a number of factors, that he was coming off such a layoff, that his workouts for the race had not been so inspiring. But I think he proved that he's a horse that just steps up his game in the afternoon, because it's not like he got a fantastic setup in this race, but he just put in that same relentless rally that we saw from him when he won the Street Sense at Churchill Downs back in October. And, I was recalling going all the way back to the summer of last year when I've got to set the morning lines for these stacked 2-year-old races full of first-time starters at Saratoga. And I remember hearing some chatter about Sovereignty, that they were thinking of him as maybe as Godolphin's Derby horse down the line, having never even raced yet. And he got entered, and I was watching some of the workouts for that race, and I was thinking to myself, this horse? I mean, he's got no speed in the morning, but sometimes workouts don't matter so much if they show up in the afternoon.
Well, he showed up in the afternoon. Sovereignty, that was his first start in 4 months. And the way that he finished in that mile and 1/16th race, I don't think he's going to have any difficulty at all with the longer distance, wherever that is next. He finishes well. He's lightly raced. He's in great hands. And even, Sovereignty, he only won by a neck over River Thames. And it's interesting, despite the fact that they finished that close to one another, I have a lot more positive take on Sovereignty than I do with regards to River Thames, who ran well. I'm a little ambivalent on his chances moving forward toward a 1 1/4 race. What's your take on River Thames?
Yeah, I've got some concerns about how far this horse wants to go. He's by McLean's Music, who you do think of as sire of precocity, horses that typically want to go mile distances or shorter than that. And when you dig into the dam side on River Thames, it's much more one-turn pedigree. So we'll see if this horse does want to go farther. I just didn't see the big excuse for him to lose that race. Yes, he was trying 2 turns for the first time, but they really quickened the pace for that third quarter mile to run it in 23-3. And that's when River Thames sort of applied the pressure to break the race open. But Sovereignty was able to make up ground through that fast third quarter and still close them down at the end. So I think that just makes you like Sovereignty more coming out of the race, and makes me wonder if River Thames couldn't win under ideal circumstances here, if he's going to be able to do it going longer.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, David, with regards to River Thames. He does get one more shot before going into the Kentucky Derby, so we'll find out a little bit more. And who knows, maybe he'll take a giant step forward next time out, wherever it might be. Okay, we need to at least address the favorite from the Fountain of Youth, and that was 4th place finisher Burnham Square. I thought he ran poorly, David. I know that he earned a career best speed figure finishing 4th. He never really looked like he was comfortable at any stage of the race. The best part of the race for Burnham Square was in deep stretch when he finally picked it up again. But I did not like what I saw from Burnham Square. What about you?
Yeah, I mentioned that fast third quarter, and it just seemed to really catch Burnham Square off guard. He could not quicken with those horses and lost ground to Sovereignty at that point in the race. And it looked for a brief moment like he was not even going to be part of the superfecta, because he was not picking up at all when they came into the stretch. But as you said, he did stay on at the end. He was galloping out well out past the wire, actually galloped out past Sovereignty as they went into the clubhouse turn, for whatever that's worth. So he does feel like a horse that is going to stay longer distances, but he's going to have to do it in faster time than he did last Saturday.
He's going to have to improve his game. He did get a 94 Beyer speed figure, so he is headed the right direction still, and his next start is expected to be in the Bluegrass Stakes at Keeneland, Burnham Square. And I hope he runs a little bit better down there than he did last Saturday at Gulfstream Park. Saturday at Aqueduct was a 1-turn mile, the Grade 3 Gotham Stakes, 50 points to the winner. And, well, David, why don't you go ahead and take this?
Yeah, Flood Zone somehow got dismissed at 17-1. First time out for Brad Cox. I guess the bettors just were not really believing his big priced maiden victory at Gulfstream Park coming into the race, but he certainly took a big step forward, not only switching into the Cox barn, but also stretching out to the mile distance here. He did get a very good trip, and this was a race that was mostly dominated towards the front end every step of the way, kind of engaged Sandman in the early stage, or Sand Devil, I should say, in the early stages. Those two dueled on the far turn, and he just had more to give through the stretches, able to pull away to win this race by about 2.5 lengths. The track at Aqueduct has been pretty dead all winter, just producing slow time. So not a big surprise that they went nearly 1 minute and 40 seconds for a mile, but that's why we rely on speed figures. Comparing this to some of the other mile races on the day, it did come up reasonably fast. So the 98 buyer doesn't surprise me that much. I still have questions about whether or not either of these two are real mile and a quarter Derby horses, but they did get respectable speed figures.
They ran relatively fast. They did, Flood Zone and Sand Devil. And again, we don't know how far each of them want to run. Neither one of them has raced 2 turns as of yet. Sand Devil, I don't know. I expected more from him, but maybe my expectations were, too high to begin with. It seems like his progress has stalled. At least they have on speed figures, 90, 93, 92. I'd like to see a forward move in there somewhere, but I haven't seen one yet. David, I lobbied to drop Sand Devil from the top 20, but you had a different take on him moving forward.
Well, he's got the 25 points. He's got 390 plus buyers. I'm not convinced that he's really a mile and a quarter horse, but it seems like the connections, based on what they've said, they do want to press forward to the Derby. Linda Rice has indicated he's going to get another shot in the Wood Memorial. We'll see how much pace shows up in that race to contest the front end along with him. So I think he at least deserves another chance to see if he can make that stride forward, because we've got other horses on the list, Brad, that just haven't run that fast. So I at least want to give him respect for running those 90 plus buyers.
Well, I mean, Beza is one of them. Beza and Sand Devil are virtually the same on speed figures. Beza in California and Sand Devil in New York. And we'll find out more about them next time. Sand Devil in the Wood, Beza in the Santa Anita Derby. Okay, before we talk briefly about the one stakes race that will be run this coming weekend, let's go to our On the Bubble segment. There were a couple changes. We actually moved Getaway Car from the top 20 back to On the Bubble. Again, I feel guilty. He's got 36 Derby points. We also added Grande, who is 2 for 2 after an okay allowance win last week at Gulfstream Park. In order to make room for Getaway Car and Grande, we had to drop Gaming and Luxor Castle, the Japanese colt. Gaming is going to run in the Virginia Derby next weekend at Colonial Downs, the first Derby points race ever at that track. So we might be reevaluating Gaming moving forward. If he runs like he's been training in California, he's been training very well, Gaming has. And Luxor Cafe, he won the Hyacinth Stakes in Japan. He runs next in the final points race in Japan, and we'll reassess his status as well. So Getaway Car and Grande, two new to the list. John Hancock and Poster and Surfside Moon. David, I liked what I saw in the Withers, but I'm a little disturbed by the lack of attention that he has received since then, and also a whole month without a workout.
Yeah, I don't know what the story is. I've seen no reporting on his status, but I did notice just looking him up recently that he has not posted a workout since the Withers, and now we're about 4 weeks out, or less than 4 weeks out from the Wood Memorial. So, I mean, you're wondering what the status is with him and whether or not he's going to be able to make a race like that. Obviously, there is time if he starts working next week, but you don't want to see big gaps at this time of the year for these horses. So monitoring him, because he's one that's going to need points in a final round prep race, as will most of the horses, really all the horses on this list, aside from Getaway Car. I mean, some people have been commenting on these videos. What about Caldera? You never mentioned Caldera, who was hitting the wire with Getaway Car in the Sunland Park Derby last time, but he's another one that we're just hitting the brakes on for now, because he's going to need a lot of points in the last round of prep races.
This final couple months leading into the Derby with regards to the point situation is going to be very interesting to see unfold. There's a lot at stake in some of these prep races, and if they end up with small fields, even more so. Lots to prove. Lots of these on the bubble horses have things that they need to accomplish in the next round of preps. Let's talk about the one prep race that is expected to be run this weekend. It's at Tampa Bay. Entries were scheduled to be taken on Wednesday. That's after David and I have recorded this video. But David, this is going to be a fun race because it includes the return of one of the top 2-year-olds in the country last year, two-time Grade 1 winner, Chancer McPatrick, adding blinkers. He finished sixth in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. What are your expectations for Chancer McPatrick, or do you have the same skepticism as me that maybe he's best as a one-turn closing sprinter?
I think this is going to be a pivotal race for Chancellor McPatrick because his Breeders' Cup was disappointing. You could say that the pace didn't develop the way that we expected it to, but he still got outclosed by Hill Road, who I think we'll talk about in just a second, another horse that is now in the Chad Brown barn. But Chancellor McPatrick did not progress with the two turns that day. And I think he's got to prove to his connections and the bettors out there that he really does want these added distances, because he really did possess a potent late kick in those one-turn races as a 2-year-old. And maybe he's a horse that is ultimately going to be best going one turn, 7 furlongs. There are plenty of major races that fit that criteria. But I think we'll learn a lot more about him in this Tampa Bay Derby.
Chancer McPatrick's wins in the Hopeful and Champaign were absolutely impressive, but they were both one-turn races. Completely different ball game when you stretch out to 2 turns. With regards to Chancer McPatrick, why is he getting such a late start? He had a chip taken out of an ankle. He had a quarter crack that he was dealing with. So he's coming into the Tampa Bay Derby off an extended layoff. I'm sure that Chad Brown would love to win this race with Chancer McPatrick, but I think he's up against it, but I thought the same thing about journalism and sovereignty. Maybe Chancer McPatrick wins the Tampa Bay Derby just because he's the best horse in the field. I believe that you and Ashley are going to be covering the Tampa Bay Derby in detail in a later video. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're going to be actually going over the entire Pick 5 sequence at Tampa, Ashley and I, and then Ashley and Mike Beer will be doing an individual race preview on the Tampa Bay Derby. So check out those perspectives. That'll be getting posted on the Daily Racing Form YouTube channel a bit later in the week.
Well, the other Chad Brown trainee that is expected to enter the Tampa Bay Derby is a horse that's making his first start for Chad Brown, and that's Breeders' Cup Juvenile third-place finisher Hill Road, who I thought ran super at Del Mar last fall. It was a race that was dominated by forwardly placed runners, and Hill Road finished as well as any for third, and then he kind of disappeared. He changed barns, now in the Chad Brown stable. He only has 5 workouts coming into the Tampa Bay Derby, 2 3/8s and 3 half-mile workouts. I have to believe that Hill Road is short, but I also have to believe he's a good horse. Do you have any opinion on Hill Road, Dave?
Yeah, I was reading our colleague Dave Gretting's article about this race and these 2 Chad Brown horses, and I believe Chad was quoted as saying, well, Chancellor McPatrick might be 1 work short and Hill Road is probably 2 works short. So I never love hearing that from a trainer, but this does feel like it's just a means to an end for both of these horses. And Hill Road is a horse that we just still have a lot to learn about, because his Breeders' Cup was really impressive. He was the one horse that ran against the race flow that day, but we still have to know if he can run like that again on the dirt, because he was so lightly raced, kind of unexposed coming into that race. So I'll be really intrigued to see what we get from him.
Yeah, Hill Road's only started 3 times, 2 times overseas and once at Del Mar. So a 3-start career for Hill Road. But to finish third in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile is a pretty good accomplishment. We'll find out more about Hill Road. The Tampa Bay Derby is also expected to include Patch Adams. David, I liked his 4th-place finish in the Southwest. I don't think he had a real clean trip early, unleashed a middle move, and then kind of lost his punch late. I liked his performance. I suspect you have a little bit different take on Patch Adams than I do.
Yeah, I'm still on the fence about him. I'm on the fence about the overall quality of the Southwest, just given the very mixed results that we saw with all those horses coming back in the Rebel just over a week ago. And while Patch Adams did make that big middle move in the race, I didn't love the way he flattened out at the end. And I still am not concerned that he wants to go the 2 turns. So I feel like there's a lot of similar questions that these horses entering the Tampa Bay Derby are going to have to answer on Saturday.
Well, the winner gets 50 points and is all but guaranteed a berth in the Kentucky Derby. So a very interesting race coming up this weekend at Tampa Bay as Chancer McPatrick returns as the class of the field. We are 2 months out from the Kentucky Derby. We have a new favorite in journalism, a new second choice, Sovereignty, and a big 2-turn question mark with regards to Gotham winner Flood Zone. This week, it's Chancer McPatrick in the Tampa Bay Derby. Next week, the following week, the first Derby prep at Colonial Downs, the Virginia Derby. Gaming is among those expected to start in that race. We'll talk about it all next week on Daily Racing Forum's Derby Watch Top 20. For David Aragona, I'm Brad Free. We'll see you next week.